Welcome to the Velvet Murmurs, where every whisper hides a secret. I'm so glad you've joined us for today's mystery. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where you're listening or watching from. We'd love to hear from our fellow mystery lovers around the world. Jessica Fletcher and the Case of the Disappearing Room. Chapter 1. The Room That Wasn't. There's a peculiar stillness to old hotels. The kind of silence that isn't quite empty, but layered with forgotten footsteps, whispers behind wallpaper, and the faint echo of keys that haven't turned in decades. Jessica Fletcher had stayed in enough of them to know the difference between charming and off. The Larkspur Hotel in Savannah was beautiful, yes, red brick with ivy winding along its columns, the scent of magnolias wafting from the garden. But something about it unsettled her. Not quite fear, not quite nostalgia, just something. She'd been invited as a guest speaker for the Southern Mystery Writers Conference, a modest gathering of authors, critics, and die-hard fans. A chance to talk about the genre she loved, meet new voices, and perhaps steal a few quiet hours to start plotting her next book. Jessica Fletcher, room 412, the clerk at the front desk announced with a smile, handing her an old brass key with a heavy lion-shaped tag. "No cards?" she asked, turning the key over. "We like to keep it traditional," the young man replied. "The elevators are just beyond the lobby, left after the grandfather clock." Jessica made her way up, her suitcase wheels thudding gently against the velvet carpet. The elevator groaned in a dignified, ancient way before lurching upward. The fourth floor smelled faintly of dust and lemon polish. She found room 412 and slipped the key into the door. As she did, the door to room 413, just next to hers, creaked open. A young woman stood in the doorway, late 30s, slim, dark hair tucked beneath a scarf. She looked exhausted. "Oh, sorry," she said quickly, stepping back to make room. "Didn't mean to startle you." "Not at all," Jessica said kindly. "Just moved in?" The woman gave a strained smile. "Yes, long trip. They put me in here last minute. Melinda Crane." "Jessica Fletcher," she offered her hand. "If you're with the conference, I suspect we'll be seeing more of each other." Melinda shook her hand but avoided eye contact. "I'm just tagging along. Research, really." She gave a small wave and disappeared into her room. The door closed with a soft click. Jessica stood for a moment, staring at it. Something about her tone felt rehearsed. That night, after a pleasant dinner reception and an early return to her room, Jessica sat by the window enjoying the Georgia evening. The trees outside rustled with the last breeze of September, and a distant ship's horn called out from the river. She was just about to turn in for the night when she heard it. A thud, a muffled cry, a gasp, then silence. It had come from the room next door. Jessica stood up instantly. She pressed her ear against the wall. Nothing. She waited. Still nothing. "Melinda?" she called softly at the door of room 413. No answer. She knocked, waited, knocked again. Silence. A wave of unease crept over her. She turned and headed down to the front desk. The night manager was a short, thin man with spectacles and a coffee stain on his shirt. He looked half asleep until Jessica approached. "I believe something may have happened in the room next to mine," she said urgently. "Room 413. I heard a loud noise, a scream. I think someone may be hurt." He blinked at her, confused. "I'm sorry, Mum. Did you say 413? "Yes." "There's no 413 on the fourth floor. We go from 411 to 412. Then it's the linen closet." Jessica stared at him. Chapter 2. Gone without a trace. The hotel night manager was still speaking, but Jessica barely registered his words. Something about original floor plans and sealed renovations. Her gaze remained fixed on the blank patch of wall between room 412 and the corner sconce, where room 413 had once clearly stood. Or had it? She stepped forward almost absently and ran her fingers along the wallpaper. The seam felt oddly raised, too fresh. A faint scent of plaster hung in the air. "You see?" the manager said, trying to smile. "Just a little confusion. Old buildings like this tend to play tricks on the mind." Jessica turned slowly to face him. "Do you often wall off rooms overnight?" He blinked. "Ma'am?" "There was a door here, a number, a lock. I spoke to the woman in that room, Melinda Crane. She had dark hair and carried a tan overnight bag. She was wearing a navy scarf. I helped her unlock this very door." I really don't know what to tell you," the manager replied, shifting uncomfortably. "We've never had a room 413. In fact, many hotels skip it intentionally. Superstition, you know." Jessica narrowed her eyes. "I've stayed in my share of superstitious hotels, but this one had a very real door." The manager didn't argue. He simply offered to call the head of maintenance in the morning, just to put your mind at ease. Back in room 412, Jessica sat on the edge of the bed, thoughts churning. She rarely doubted her own memory. But this, it was so deliberate, so clean. No traces, no witnesses, unless... She stood up again and moved toward her suitcase. Tucked in the side pouch was her compact digital camera, a habit she'd kept from her travel writing days. She flipped it on and scrolled through the images she'd taken earlier that day. A photo from the lobby. One of the old oak staircase, a candid of the sunset over the garden, and then, there. She froze. A picture of Melinda. Jessica had snapped the photo almost playfully after helping her with the luggage, amused at the matching brass key tags. Melinda had smiled faintly, holding her overnight bag, but Jessica wasn't looking at her smile. Her eyes were locked on something else. In the hallway mirror behind Melinda, a man was watching them, not walking past, not reflected accidentally. Standing completely still, dressed in a grey overcoat, face half obscured in shadow, eyes fixed directly at the camera. She hadn't noticed him in the moment, but there he was in the reflection, silent, intent, unblinking. Jessica zoomed in, grainy pixel by pixel. The man's face was unfamiliar, but his presence, undeniable. A chill danced up her spine. The next morning, sunlight did little to banish the tension from the hallway. Jessica rose early, dressed smartly, and made her way down to the front desk again. A different clerk was on duty now, cheerful, fresh-faced, unaware. "Yes, Mrs. Fletcher. Everything comfortable with your room?" Jessica gave a polite smile. "Yes, thank you. Though, I'm a little concerned. I heard some commotion from the adjacent room last night. Room 413, I believe." The clerk tilted her head. "I'm sorry, there's no 413. Jessica tapped her fingers on the desk. "Is the hotel manager in?" "Not yet, but I can leave a message." "No need," Jessica said gently. "Would you mind checking one thing for me in the guest registry?" The clerk obliged. Jessica scanned the open pages quickly. No Melinda Crane, not even a booking close to the name. Jessica tried a different tack. "Any guests check out unexpectedly last night?" "No, ma'am." "All accounted for." Jessica nodded absently and turned to leave. Back upstairs, she sat at the desk in her room and reviewed her notes. Something wasn't adding up. Even if the room had been sealed earlier, the presence of that woman and the scream was real. And the photo, proof of both her presence and the strange man who'd been watching. On a hunch, Jessica got down on her knees and checked under the bed. At first, nothing. But tucked behind a loose leg of the frame, barely visible against the old carpet, something metallic caught the light. She reached for it. An earring. Gold, teardrop-shaped, with a navy enamel center. Jessica held it up to the light. Melinda had worn matching earrings. She remembered clearly they'd stood out against the scarf. This one had fallen off in a hurry or been torn off. Jessica's jaw set, her instincts sharpening. She stood up, walked to the bricked-over section of hallway again, and pressed her palm lightly against the wall. The woman had been real. The scream had been real, and someone had gone to great lengths to make it all disappear. "All right," Jessica murmured. "Let's see what the hotel doesn't want us to find." Chapter 3. The Architect's Secret. The Savannah City archives smelled of mildew, old paper, and time. Jessica Fletcher had always appreciated the quiet dignity of local record halls, tucked away from tourists, untouched by digital chaos. The clerk on duty, a spectacled woman named Audrey, recognized Jessica from her books and was more than happy to help. "I'm looking for original blueprints of the Larkspur Hotel," Jessica said. "Ideally from the late 1940s through the 1970s. I believe there may have been structural changes that were never officially recorded." Audrey gave a knowing nod. "You'd be surprised how often that happens around here. Owners come and go, but secrets? They like to stay." A few minutes later, Jessica was seated at a long wooden table with a rolled stack of floor plans, dust smudging her fingertips as she carefully unfurled them. She found the 4th floor easily. And there it was, room 413 clear as day, positioned directly between 412 and a staff supply room. No blank wall, no hidden passage, just a normal guest room, identical in size to the others. Jessica traced her finger over the outline. It existed, or rather, it had. But then she noticed something odd. On a set of revised plans from 1978, the room had been marked as inactive. A diagonal line ran through its space, and in small letters, sealed, "See Project Darrow." Jessica's eyes narrowed. Darrow, that name rang a bell. She flipped through the accompanying files, and sure enough, it was there. Owen Darrow, listed as the lead architect on the Larkspur's mid-century restoration. She jotted down his name, birth year, and license number. Then, in a separate file tucked beneath the building permits, she found a faded, water-stained newspaper clipping. "Architect's career derailed after allegation surface," dated 1981. The article was brief, but troubling. Owen Darrow had been quietly dismissed from a number of hotel projects across the South, following investigations into structural irregularities, unlicensed designs, and rumored misuse of private rooms. Rumored misuse? Jessica read the phrase again. It was vague, deliberately so, but the timing matched. She copied the article and the blueprint page and slipped them into her bag. Back at the Larkspur, the front desk manager from the night before was absent. A new concierge greeted her, far more cheerful, as if the events of last night had never happened. Jessica climbed the creaking stairs instead of taking the lift, noting every shift in the wallpaper, every oddly placed sconce. As she approached room 412, she glanced again at the wall where 413 had once been. Still blank. But something new caught her eye. Above the faux wall, at crown-molding height, was a faint, rectangular outline, a shadow where a doorframe had once met the wall. Barely visible in daylight, only someone truly looking would see it. Jessica tapped the edge with her knuckles. It sounded slightly hollow. She stepped into her room, closed the door, and locked it. Then she fetched a mechanical pencil and her small pocket torch. Kneeling beside the shared wall, she began tapping methodically, listening for changes in density. The section behind her wardrobe was particularly hollow. She shifted the piece of furniture a few inches, just enough to inspect the skirting board beneath. That's when she found it, a hairline crack in the wood, running perfectly vertical. She ran the pencil along it. Someone had bricked off the entrance, but they hadn't bricked off everything. There was still a cavity behind this wall. She needed answers, and Owen Darrow was the only real lead. Jessica returned to her room, opened her laptop, and began searching local records. Darrow hadn't published anything since 1983. No current license, no recent employment, no obituary either. Eventually, she found a thread, a forum post from a historic restoration group that referenced an old man named Darrow living just outside the city in Tybee Island, known for ranting about his rooms being stolen. Bingo. Jessica dialed the number listed for the property's caretaker. A gruff voice answered. "Hello?" "Yes, I'm trying to reach Owen Darrow. I'm a writer looking into historic architecture in Savannah, particularly the Larkspur Hotel." "I believe he worked on it?" There was silence on the other end. Then, "You're not the first to come asking. But if you're smart, you'll be the last." Jessica's tone sharpened. "I don't scare easily, Mr. T. McClellan. I handle Darrow's place. He don't talk much. But if you want to waste your afternoon, come on out. He's mostly lucid before sunset." Tybee Island was quiet and windswept. The house, a sun-bleached bungalow with flaking shutters, sat at the edge of the marsh. Owen Darrow was seated in a wicker chair on the porch, staring at the horizon like it owed him something. He was wiry and leathery, with sharp eyes that hadn't dulled. He didn't look at Jessica when she approached. "You came about the room," he said. Jessica stopped in her tracks. "Yes, room 413, at the Larkspur." He nodded once, very slowly. "They bricked it. Thought that would kill the design. But a design ain't just bricks, it's memory. It lingers." "What was the purpose of that room, Mr. Darrow?" He looked at her now. "To disappear. That was the purpose. A room that couldn't be found. Not unless you remembered it. Not unless you were meant to." Jessica's heart pounded. Why would a hotel want a room like that? Darrow's voice was a whisper. "Because sometimes, Miss Fletcher, guests check in, and the world needs them to vanish." Chapter 4. The Man in the Portrait. Jessica Fletcher sat in the Larkspur's drawing room that evening, her notebook open but untouched on her lap. Outside, twilight cast long shadows through the mullioned windows, tinting the walls with shades of copper and rose. Inside, the low hum of conversation from the conference's welcome dinner drifted faintly from the dining hall. But Jessica wasn't interested in food, or networking, or polite discussions about plotting techniques. She was staring at a painting. It hung above the mantel, framed in thick, dark wood, an oil portrait of a man, mid-40s perhaps, dressed in a grey overcoat, one hand tucked into his lapel. His expression was blank, but not neutral, watchful, cold, as if he were quietly amused by secrets he alone understood. And now, after her visit to Tybee Island and hearing Owen Darrow speak of rooms designed to disappear, Jessica recognized him. She fished her camera from her handbag and flipped to the photo she had taken of Melinda. There, in the mirror's reflection, was the exact same man. Same coat, same posture, same piercing gaze. He hadn't simply looked like the portrait. He was the portrait. Jessica stood slowly and approached the painting, careful not to draw attention. Up close, the brushstrokes were deliberate, almost too precise, like a photo rendered by hand. But there was no plaque, no artist's signature, no name. Just a forgotten face in a hallway no one remembered. "Admiring our ghost?" came a voice behind her. Jessica turned to see an elderly bellhop standing beside a drinks cart. His face was deeply lined, his shoulders slightly stooped, but his eyes were sharp with mischief and memory. "I beg your pardon?" she asked. He nodded toward the portrait. "No one knows who he is. Been hanging there longer than I've worked here, and that's saying something. Some say he was a founding investor. Others say he was a missing guest. Me? I think he's just one of them people who don't leave easy." Jessica studied the man's face again. "Has anyone ever tried to remove it?" The bellhop chuckled. "That's the funny thing. They say when they renovated in the 70s, tore out half the west wing and all, this painting kept ending up back on the wall, like clockwork, even when they stored it." She raised an eyebrow. "Stored it?" "Yup. Put it in the basement for 3 months. Next thing you know, back here it is. Even got a note one time, unsigned, saying, hey, he belongs where he can see." He shook his head. "Gives me the willies." Jessica hesitated. "Do you happen to know when this man stayed at the hotel?" The bellhop's smile faded slightly. He leaned in and whispered, "Miss Fletcher. He checks in. But he never checks out." Later that evening, Jessica took a walk down the hallway where room 413 had once stood. The carpet muffled her steps as she passed the now seamless wall, her thoughts turning over every clue. The earring, the hollow wall, the blueprint, and now the man in the painting, watching from the shadows. She stopped outside room 412, her own, and there on the floor, barely visible beneath the edge of the wall sconce, was something new. A thin paper card, face down. Jessica bent down and picked it up. It was a vintage-style keycard, the type used decades ago before digital locks. On it, in faded ink, were the words, 413, for those who remember. Her heart skipped. Had someone slid this under her door? Or dropped it? She didn't wait to question it. Instead, she hurried downstairs, cutting through the service corridor toward the manager's office. If anyone had answers about that portrait, it was someone with access to the hotel's oldest records. The night manager wasn't in, but the door was open. Inside, the walls were lined with dusty file drawers, ledgers, and maintenance logs. Jessica scanned the cabinets quickly, fingers trailing labels: guest registry, 1940s, restoration permits, internal correspondence. She found one drawer labeled simply Archives, non-standard. It creaked as she pulled it open. Inside were a handful of envelopes, a few black and white photographs, and one yellowed memo, typed in courier font. 2. Staff coordination. Subject, room 413, protocol reinforcement. Room 413 is not to appear on printed or digital materials. All references to it are to be redirected. Any guest inquiring about the room is to be reported to manager directly. Do not engage further. Signed, R. C. Vale. Jessica's eyes widened. Vale. She knew that name. Vincent Vale was the 1940s illusionist who had once performed at the Larkspur, and his descendant, Colton Vale, was at the conference now. She slipped the memo into her notebook and backed out of the office. There were too many coincidences now to ignore. A woman disappears. A room is erased. A painting watches. And the great-nephew of a master illusionist is hosting a workshop on misdirection tomorrow morning. Jessica turned the card in her hand once more. Room 413 hadn't just vanished. It was being hidden. Chapter 5. A room within a room. The hallway was silent save for the soft hum of old electricity behind the walls. Jessica Fletcher stood just outside room 412, staring at the sliver of wallpaper where a door should have been. In her hand, she held the old key card marked 413, for those who remember. She waited until well past midnight. No guests in sight. The hallway lights had dimmed, and the only sounds were the creaks of a settling building and the occasional groan of pipes somewhere deep beneath the floor. Jessica slipped the card into her coat pocket and fetched the slim pocket torch from her bag. Then she moved deliberately, not toward the vanished door, but toward the service stairwell at the far end of the corridor. She had seen the blueprints, after all, and they showed something the modern hallway did not. A second, narrower access point behind room 412. A storage cupboard disguised as a linen closet stood beside the stairs. Jessica opened it, brushing past hanging robes and folded towels, then crouched low. Just as she had suspected, behind the bottom shelf was a false panel, slightly ajar. She slipped through. Behind the wall, the air was colder, staler. Her torch illuminated a narrow service hallway, long abandoned, its floor covered in layers of dust and forgotten footprints. Wires hung from the ceiling, pipes snaked along the walls like veins in an old body. Jessica followed the path until it opened into a small alcove with a faded wooden door. There was no number on it, but the brass handle was still polished, recently touched. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the vintage key card, and inserted it into the old-fashioned keyhole. Click! The door creaked open. Inside was a room perfectly intact, clean, undisturbed, wallpapered in a vintage green damask, heavy velvet curtains drawn over the windows, a desk in one corner, an armchair beside a cold fireplace, and a double bed with crisp sheets, recently made. But what stopped Jessica in her tracks wasn't the furnishings, it was the wall of photographs, dozens of Polaroids, each pinned precisely above the desk, each one featuring a person, some posing, some candid, some clearly taken without the subject's knowledge, different eras, different clothing, but the same backdrop again and again, room 413. Jessica stepped closer, her eyes scanning the photos. There was a man in a naval officer's uniform, a woman in a sequined dress holding a glass of champagne, a teenager staring fearfully at the camera mid-turn, a child clutching a toy rabbit. One photograph was missing from the wall, its edges still pinned, but the image torn out. Jessica turned toward the desk. There sat a guestbook, the same kind found in bed and breakfasts of another age. She opened it. Melinda Crane's name was on the last line. Room 413. Date, yesterday. Jessica exhaled slowly. She was not imagining this. Melinda had stayed here. She had written her name. Someone had prepared this room for her. But where was she now, and who had taken her photo? A small movement caught Jessica's eye. She turned sharply toward the armchair by the fireplace. Something glinted beneath it. She crouched and reached underneath, pulling out a small digital recorder, the kind journalists used. It was scratched, but intact. She pressed play. A woman's voice crackled through. "If you're hearing this, then it means they found me, or I found them. Either way, I don't have long. My name is Melinda Crane. I'm a reporter. I was investigating disappearances tied to the Vale family and their ties to room 413. It's not a myth. It's not just a number missing from a floor plan. It's real, and it's being used." The recording cut off. Just static. Jessica felt a chill spread down her spine. She rewound the tape and played it again, listening carefully. At the very end, barely audible beneath the static, was another voice, a man's voice, low, calm, measured. She shouldn't have remembered. Jessica looked around the room again, this time with a sharper eye. She opened the wardrobe. Inside, hanging neatly, was a grey overcoat, the same coat the man in the portrait had worn. She reached into the inside pocket, a folded theatre programme. Vale's Grand Illusions, The Man Who Disappears. Dated November 1947. The illusionist Vincent Vale and his descendant Colton Vale just happened to be hosting the talk tomorrow titled Memory, Misdirection, and What the Eye Misses. Jessica stepped back into the hallway behind the service wall, heart pounding, not from fear, but from focus. Room 413 wasn't just a hidden space, it was a trap, a stage for disappearing acts, a prison for inconvenient truths. And Jessica Fletcher had just walked straight into the middle of its final performance. Chapter 6. The Saint's Sermon. Morning light filtered through gauzy curtains as Jessica Fletcher stirred a second spoon of sugar into her tea. She sat alone at a table near the conference hall's breakfast spread, her notebook closed, but her thoughts wide open. She had spent the early hours transcribing Melinda Crane's final words from the recorder, playing them back over and over, each time picking up faint new sounds, tiny clues. Her gut told her time was running out. Across the dining room, a crowd was beginning to gather around a temporary stage. On the schedule, Colton Vale, the headline speaker of the day, presenting his masterclass, Memory, Misdirection, and What the Eye Misses. Jessica watched him step into the spotlight. He was striking, dark suit, clean lines, effortless charm. His voice slid into the microphone like velvet over steel. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen," he began. "Before we talk about memory, let's talk about belief. Belief," he said, "is a room we enter willingly. And if the walls move, if the lights flicker, we say it's part of the act. We surrender logic to theatre." There was a polite ripple of laughter. Jessica folded her hands. Her expression did not change. Vale walked across the stage, holding up an old playing card, then, with a flick of his fingers, turned it into a feather. "But theatre," he said, pausing, "can also be used to hide. Hide guilt, hide people, even hide rooms." Jessica's eyes narrowed. Was that aimed at her? He smiled as if he knew. After the session, Jessica approached him near the stage exit. He noticed her immediately. "Jessica Fletcher," he said, extending a hand. "A living legend. I'm surprised you don't have a wand yourself." "I've never needed one," she replied coolly. "Your talk was fascinating, especially the part about hiding rooms." Colton gave a small, amused smile. "Ah, metaphor, but it's the metaphors people remember, isn't it?" Jessica reached into her bag and withdrew the 1947 theatre program she had found in room 413. "This metaphor," she said, holding it out, "was in a wardrobe belonging to your great-uncle." His hand froze mid-air. Jessica pressed further. "You know room 413 exists. You know someone, possibly you, has been using it. The photographs, the guest book, the sealed hallway." "What are you really hiding, Mr. Vale?" Colton's smile vanished just for a second. Then it returned, almost sympathetically. "Do you believe in protecting people, Mrs. Fletcher?" "I believe in exposing truth." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Melinda Crane was chasing a ghost. That room, room 413, is a scar, a remnant of something that should have never existed." Jessica stared at him. "Then why does it still exist?" Colton paused, then leaned in and whispered, "Because some performances can't be cancelled, even after the curtains fall." And with that, he walked away. Later that afternoon, Jessica made her way back to the archive room in the hotel basement. She'd scoured the files for Project Darrow, but now she wanted something more human. Staff logs, security rosters, anyone who had keys to restricted areas. One file stood out: Red Room Protocol, Confidential Archive. It contained only a few documents partially blacked out, marked with an old Larkspur Hotel letterhead. The fragments she could read mentioned compartmentalized isolation, voluntary witness redirection, and something chilling. Subjects showing signs of recognition must be cycled into Observation Suite 413 for evaluation and detainment. At the bottom of one page, a list of code names and ciphers. One was underlined in red: Saint, retained, non-compliant, transferred off record. Saint. Jessica turned it over, trying to recall where she had seen that name. Then it hit her. The portrait. The man in the oil painting. He wasn't a founder. He wasn't even a guest. He was a prisoner, a man who had either discovered too much or remembered what others forgot. A man they called the Saint. That night, Jessica couldn't sleep. The shadows in her room stretched too long. Her thoughts moved like gears, pieces slowly clicking together. The key card, the photos, the ghostly painting, and Colton Vale's haunting words. Some performances can't be cancelled. Suddenly, a noise. Software A knock at the door, then another. 3 slow taps. Jessica opened the door cautiously, only to find no one, but on the floor, a Polaroid. She picked it up with gloved fingers. It was a photo of her, taken from behind, taken inside room 413. Jessica staggered back, pulse quickening. Someone had followed her. Someone had taken her picture inside a room no one admitted existed, and someone was now letting her know they were watching. She knew then what she had to do. She'd return to room 413, alone, and wait. Chapter 7. The Red Room Protocol. The hotel's corridors were deserted. Midnight once again. Jessica Fletcher moved silently, her footsteps careful, her breathing steady. She wore a dark shawl, a practical crossbody satchel, and a small flashlight tucked into her pocket. In her hand, once again, was the vintage brass key card marked 413, for those who remember. But this time, she didn't plan to investigate. She planned to be seen. She entered the same narrow service hallway behind the linen closet, followed the dusty path past the exposed pipes, and came to the faded wooden door. Unmarked, old, and waiting. Click. Room 413 welcomed her again like a stage before a play. Inside, everything was exactly as she had left it. The green damask wallpaper, the perfectly made bed, the cold fireplace. The photographs were still pinned to the wall, but now 2 new photos had been added. One of her outside the archive room, and one of her standing near the portrait. Whoever had taken these was inside the hotel, watching her movements, recording her investigation. Jessica sat in the armchair, waiting. She didn't know how long passed. 10 minutes? 20? Time moved strangely in this room. Then she heard it, a soft mechanical click and the creak of something moving behind the far wall. She stood up, but didn't panic. Her fingers grazed the recorder hidden in her coat. The moment she had stepped inside, she had switched it on. Whatever happened tonight would be documented. The wall behind the fireplace shifted. A panel slid open, revealing a narrow chamber of black painted steel lit by a single red bulb. And out of the shadows stepped a man. Tall, formal, face partially concealed by shadow, but unmistakably the man from the painting. Only this time, he was real. Jessica's pulse quickened. He didn't speak. She did. "Your Saint," she said calmly. A ghost the hotel kept alive, not dead, not disappeared, just forgotten. He tilted his head. "You were the first," she said. "Weren't you? You remembered room 413, and they locked you inside it." Finally, he spoke, his voice low and broken. "You don't belong here." Jessica stepped forward. "Neither do you." The man's eyes glistened, not with fear, but something else. Regret. "The room feeds off memory," he said. "If you enter it once, it watches. If you return, it records." Jessica nodded. "It has recorded everything, every guest, every face, every disappearance." Suddenly, more footsteps echoed behind the wall. Jessica turned toward the hidden passage and found herself facing Colton Vale. No tricks now, no smile, just a hard, cold stare. "You couldn't leave it alone," he said. "I'm not the one who built a prison disguised as a guest suite." Jessica replied. Colton stepped into the room, calm as ever. You're here because you chose to remember. Most forget. It's safer that way. Safer for whom? He didn't answer. Behind him, two men appeared, plain clothes, armed, not hotel staff, not police. Jessica raised her chin. What are you going to do? Lock me in here forever? Drug me? Rewrite my memory? Colton almost smiled. That was the old protocol. These days, we're more sophisticated. But Jessica had been prepared. She reached into her coat and tossed a small flare from her bag onto the bed. It wasn't fire, but smoke. A thick, choking orange haze began to fill the room. Colton shouted. The armed men stepped back. Jessica hit the floor and crawled beneath the bed, pulling out the loose tile she had noticed earlier, a vent shaft. She had studied the blueprint carefully. This exit ran beneath the hotel kitchen. She disappeared into it, dragging the saint behind her. 30 minutes later, Jessica stumbled out the back exit of the hotel, Saint wheezing beside her. 2 police cars waited outside. She had left an envelope with Melinda Crane's recorder, the photos, and the room 413 key card in the hands of Detective Lila Ramos, a local officer Jessica had quietly tipped off earlier that day. Ramos stepped forward as Jessica and the Saint emerged into the night. You were right, she said. The whole place was a shell. Hidden rooms, no public records. The Vale family's been running a private intelligence ring out of that hotel for decades. Jessica nodded. Disguised as magic, cloaked in nostalgia. Saint looked up, blinking at the stars. He hadn't seen the sky in years. By morning, room 413 was officially sealed. For good. The Larkspur was under investigation. Colton Vale was missing, gone before the police arrived. But now the story was public. Jessica stood beside the hotel steps as the portrait was removed at last. She looked into the eyes of the man once called Saint, now free, and handed him the photograph of himself, taken decades ago before the room claimed him. I remembered, she said softly. He simply whispered, Thank you. Chapter 8. Exit. Stage right. The morning sun cast a pale gold across the iron balconies of Savannah's historic district. From the outside, the Larkspur Hotel looked unchanged, its ivy still curled across the red bricks, its windows polished, its columns dignified. But inside, the air was different. Quiet, cold, exposed. Room 413 was now fully uncovered, a real space, no longer sealed by lies or illusion. Crime scene tape crisscrossed its doorway, now returned to visibility after construction crews removed the false wall. Police technicians in white coveralls moved silently through the narrow space, collecting evidence. Jessica Fletcher stood at the edge of the hallway, her arms folded, her mind sharp despite the long night. Detective Lila Ramos joined her, holding a folder of fresh documents. It's deeper than we thought, Ramos said, flipping open the file. Turns out, room 413 wasn't just a curiosity, it was a hub, a silent room used by intelligence contractors, private security firms, even political campaigns. Jessica nodded, unsurprised. People were lured in under false pretenses, journalists, activists, whistleblowers. And if they got too close to something sensitive, they didn't just disappear, they were erased. We've identified 3 missing persons from the photos you found, Ramos continued. All of them reported missing between 1979 and 1994. 2 of them were never linked to the hotel, until now. Jessica looked down the hall toward the empty frame where the Saint's portrait once hung. It was now, in evidence, storage, the canvas folded and bagged. But its silence still lingered. Out in the garden, Jessica sat on a wrought iron bench beneath a moss-covered oak tree. The Saint, whose real name, she had learned, was Robert Thorne, sat beside her. Clean-shaven now, wearing borrowed clothes, his eyes less haunted. He held the old theatre program in his hands. "I was never supposed to leave that room," he said softly. "They told me if I stepped out, no one would know who I was. My bank accounts, my records, even my birth certificate, gone. Only the room remembered me." Jessica studied him. "Rooms don't remember, Robert. People do, and I will." He smiled faintly. "What happens now? You get your name back, your story. And maybe," she added gently, "a little peace." That evening, as the sun dipped low over the Savannah River, Jessica returned to her guest room at a different inn. No illusions, no secret doors. She set her notebook on the writing desk and began outlining her next book. She paused, considering the title. The Room That Wasn't. Not a ghost story, not even a murder mystery, but a story about memory. About how some places are designed to vanish and some people are trained to forget, but not everyone does. And sometimes all it takes is one person to remember and refuse to be gaslit by silence. A knock at the door. It was Ramos holding a plain brown envelope. "This arrived at the precinct, no return address. We traced the courier, it was dropped off early this morning." Jessica opened the envelope. Inside, a single Polaroid photo, her, taken last night in the garden beside Robert Thorne. But in the background was Colton Vale, blurry but visible, watching from the shadows between two trees, alive and still playing his part. Ramos saw it too. "You think he'll resurface?" Jessica slipped the photo into her notebook. "Oh, he will," she said calmly. "Illusionists crave applause, and he hasn't taken his final bow yet." As the lights of Savannah flickered on one by one, Jessica Fletcher sat quietly by the window with a cup of tea, her typewriter ready. She had survived room 413, uncovered the conspiracy, freed the man forgotten by time. And now, as the city whispered into night, she prepared to do what she did best. Turn memory into truth, and truth into justice.